Upside Down in the Middle of Nowhere, Chapter 9. It didn't take a minute for it to get so hot and thick and sticky up inside the house. The floors were even sweating. Georgie kept pestering Mama for one of those bottles of water stacked across the table, but Mama said no, that was for later, for just in case. So we were all stuck sipping on boring faucet water and the sweet tea, but it didn't taste right without ice. Mama wasn't letting nobody open the fridge for nothing because we let out all the cold air, and I guess we were saving that just in case, too. The wind was banging the screen door like a drum while Daddy told us how he remembered having hurricane parties when he was a kid. The uneasy feeling up inside me was constant as the sounds of slapping and creaking in the air. Georgie announced that Mama was fixing to bring out my birthday cake, and everybody gathered in the living room. Celie giggled and ran out over to switch the lights off. And the surprised look on her face when she remembered there wasn't no power made us all laugh. I set Cricket in her shoebox bed, and she went right to sleep, and I stood with my hands folded behind my back, bouncing on my tippy toes. Mama came into the room carrying my cake, and she looked extra pretty, smiling big behind the glow of my 10 birthday candles. She was wearing a new lime green colored dress that she'd made so special just for my party, and the color of the dress showed off the flecks of gold in her eyes. Mama, real careful, placed my beautiful double-decker birthday cake right on top of the two milk crates and stacked in the middle of the living room. I don't care much for pink and the other foo-foo colors, so Mama decorated the cake with buttermilk icing in every shade of blue under the sun. It was more beautiful than anything that had ever come out of Mom's kitchen, and it was glowing right along with all them candles. Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you. And I stood next to the flickering candlelight and looked at all the people I loved, even Georgie singing loudly and happy as could be for me. Colleen was walking in a slow circle doing his best to sing the birthday song, and Kayla was still eating jambalaya. Poor thing was trying her best, but the rice fell off her spoon every time she lifted it to her mouth, and the slight sight of it made me giggle. Celie was sitting on Daddy's lap, swinging her legs to the beat of the song, and the two of them grinning like possums. Out of the big window behind them, the trees were dancing to the rhythm of my birthday song. Miss rested her oversized backside on Uncle T-Bone's skinny knee, and he sat on one side of the metal folding chairs, just a flashing that silly gold tooth, trying to watch the presentation of my birthday cake over the top of his girlfriend's gigantic tangerine hat. Georgie stood as close as he could to Miss without actually touching her, his usual goofy grin stretched across his face. Mama looked at me with eyes soft and sweet as butter and her cheeks full of rose color. She had her arms around Tate's shoulders, and it might have been because of the way things looked in the warm candlelight, or maybe because her happy shining through. Either way, Tate looked extra beautiful sitting there wrapped in Mama's love. Cricket had tipped out of her box and was running full speed off in the corner, chasing her own fuzzy black tail. Even my sweet puppy was celebrating. Then I seen Mima. She was smiling from ear to ear, singing the birthday song louder than everyone, holding up the sign, I love you. I smiled at her and gave her the sign back, and my heart all but exploded with all the love I was feeling. The song ended, and I squeezed my eyes shut and made my secret birthday wish, and I used my wish on Tate. Right then, I couldn't think of one single thing to wish for except for her, even though she'd made her wish on a clover. I opened my eyes and blew out my candles, and at the exact same time, a loud toot came over from where Kayla was sitting. The room got quiet. Cricket stopped running in circles, and the puppy tilted her head and made a tiny whine. Oops, Kayla said, and reached her hand back to grab her bottom. Georgie went into hysterics. Oh, no, she didn't. He waved his hand in front of his nose like there was actually a bad smell. Kayla, say excuse me, Mama said. Excuse me, Kayla said, and kept on eating. Shush, Mima said and stomped her foot. She finally found whatever station it was that she'd been looking for on the battery-operated radio, but the man's voice kept cutting in and out like he had the hiccups. Daddy got up from the table where he was staring at the tracking chart again, and he went over and fiddled with the radio's antenna until the sound came in clear. Mima planted herself back in her chair. Me and Celia were playing a clapping game, and Tate hummed along, singing with her big mouth full of birthday cake. Hey, Uncle T-Bone said, holding his cell phone and nodding in Daddy's direction. Alvin just called. Says he's found out about the storm. My uncle rolled his eyes and glanced at Tay. He's been drinking. There ain't no doubt about that, George. Says he's on his way over to pick up his daughter. Daddy shook his head and rubbed the back of his neck. All right. He looked over at Georgie. Son, why don't you and T-Bone come with me and help wash this pot outside before the weather gets any worse? Georgie jumped up. Sure, Daddy. A quiet fell over the room like we were all just sitting there. The seconds ticked by, waiting for him to come. Mama and Mima stared at the radio, listening. I had never noticed till that minute how much they looked alike. They had the same curves of their noses, the same high cheeks, and the same exact worried eyebrows. Eyebrows that looked like frowns hanging over their eyes, but it was Mama's hand that caught my attention. Her hand was rubbing on Mima's shoulder, and I couldn't see Mama giving little squeezes. I could see Mama giving little squeezes. Every time lightning flashed and lit up the room, a clap of thunder rolled somewhere off in the distance, Mama gave a shoulder squeeze, and Mima let out a heavy sigh and reached up and pat the back of Mama's hand, and went on for a good long while. Then Mima grunted, trying to stand up quick, and said to Mama, I'll go fill the tub. I was fixing to ask her why when the front door flew open and the wind blew in Tate's dad, and the door was smacking up against the side of the house. Celie ran over and tried to pull it shut, but the wind was blowing too hard, and I slid past him and went to help her. Tate's dad brought the stormy weather with him, and shadows filled the living room, and it turned 3 shades darker inside and out. The temperature inside the house felt like it was up by 50 degrees on account of the heat pouring off my cousin's dad. Mima came back in the room. Elvin, is all she said with a nod. Then she went on and took a heavy seat back in her chair. Mama Jean, he slurred and slow blinked. I smelled the whiskey on my uncle's breath and the sourness it was making my stomach do flip-flops. He stared down at his only child with his lip curled up like he couldn't stand her. Even if my daddy looked at me that way for even a second, I'd shrivel up and die from sadness right there on the spot. Get your butt up, girl, Tate's dad spit out. He pushed hard up against the side of his leg with his grimy old work boot. Weather's bad. Gotta get you home, he burped and swayed. Anger started rising up inside me, a heavy burning that started in the bottom of my belly, and it worked its way up past my heart and caused a throb in my head, turning my hands into fists. I jumped up off the floor without thinking, and Cricket ran up and hid behind Mima's feet and started a low puppy growl. The man was drunk, mean and huge, but I wasn't going to sit there and watch him bully my Tate no more. Celie, honey, Mama said all calm but in a hurry, go get your daddy. Yes, ma'am, Celie ran like a scuttlebug. It's all right, Auntie Catherine, said Tate said to Mama in a voice I hardly recognized. Tate set her plate of cake on the floor in front of her and started to get up. She was almost standing when her dad pushed again with his foot and knocked her off balance. She fell forward and her hand came down, landing smack dab in the middle of her plate. Gobs of thick, creamy blue buttermilk frosting flew up in the air and landed with a plop all over Mama's wood floor. I barely remember winding up my arm like one of the girl softball pitchers I barely remember winding up my arm like one of them girl softball pitchers and bringing my fist up as hard as I could, square into big, hard, bloated belly. The man barely moved, and a hot poof of sour air shot from his mouth. Hatred poured out of his eyes and straight into mine, and a shiver ran through my hair, and his giant hand flew up over his head, and I squeezed my eyes closed and covered my head. What in blazes is going on here? Daddy's voice came rushing into the room, and I opened one eye to see Daddy holding tight onto the man's raised arm. Daddy looked around the room, and Mom was standing right close, clutching Kyla to her chest, rocking back and forth with Celie hiding behind her. Mima was mumbling with her face buried in her hands. Daddy looked down at Tate and seen her crying with blue frosting everywhere. Stupid girl made a mess on your floor, man, Tate's dad said. Daddy's eyes landed on Tate's. Dad. I took a step towards the stinking bully. Armani. Daddy held his arm straight out in my direction. Sir? I said, never taking my eyes off the man. Armani, Daddy said again, look at me. I turned my head towards Daddy, but kept my eyes locked on Tate's dad, and he looked away with the slow, bouncy, beady eyes, and Dad took a step to the left, blocking me from my enemy. That's enough, Armani. Tears puddled up, stinging my eyes, and Mama helped my cousin to her feet. I'm so sorry, Auntie Catherine, Tate sniffled. Oh, sweetheart, it's not your fault, Mama said. Come on in the kitchen and let's clean you up. Mama put her arm around Tate and led her towards the kitchen. My fool-headed uncle grabbed Tate's arm. She could clean up at home, he slurred, and his fingers digging into the softness of her arm. Mama kissed Tate on the cheek and walked away, and I was mad all over again. How could Mama just leave her to fend for herself? Real calm like, Daddy looked at Tate's dad straight in the eye. I don't think it's necessary, Elvin, without moving his eyes. Daddy peeled one of the man's fingers one by one away from Tay-Tay's arm, and he took the man's hand in his like they were fixing to shake. Daddy put his other arm around the man's shoulder, and just like that, Daddy walked him to the door. T-Bone's going to take you and Tay-Tay home in my truck. Tay-Tay rubbed her arm while her dad's fingers had dug in, and she stared down at the floor. And I stood beside her, not knowing what to say, and a tear slipped from my eye and landed on the floor. I'm sorry for ruining your birthday, Armani. You didn't ruin it. Oh, poor breath did. Oh, poo-poo breath did. I said with my lip curled up and my head slinging to the side. Tay-Tay's head was hanging, but she turned it up enough so she could look at me, and a tiny smile found her eyes. Yeah, poo breath, she whispered. Another tear ran down her cheek, and I reached up and wiped it with my thumb. Well, I better go, she shrugged. The thought of her going home with that man made me feel sick. You should stay here, Tate. Let me ask Mama if you could sleep over. Mima walked up beside me. She needs to go on with her daddy now before the storm gets worse. Your Uncle T-Bone's already out there waiting. Mima had both hands on her hips, looking over the top of her glasses. But Mima, that man's gonna kill her, I argued. Nobody's gonna kill anybody. You listen here. Mima looked from me to Tate. My own daddy was a mean old dog when he drank, just like that one. And you do as you're told, and don't give him no reason to have to correct you. Do you hear me, baby girl? Mima took Tate's face in her hands. Yes, ma'am, Tay nodded. But Mima shook her fingers up in my face. Nope, that's it. She gave Tate a big hug and then shooed her towards the door. Go on now. Mima turned on the switch for the hall light, forgetting that the power was out, and she slapped the wall and scooted off towards her room. And for you, Miss Muhammad Ali, she hollered at me over her shoulder, you and me's going to have a talk later. I rolled my eyes as far up into my head as possible. Who's Muhammad Ali? I hollered after her. Mama's hanging plant came crashing down through the window, and shattered glass flew clear into the living room, and I never made it to the door in time to say bye to my best friend.